Hello guys, and welcome to another multiple apps workflow tutorial with me, Eldrin from Lamir. Today we'll be taking a look at the standard shader, subsurface scattering, and a few UDIM tricks. Alrighty, so as I mentioned in my last tutorial, which was a importing the DAZ update for all you guys who use DAZ and are having trouble with R16 and R17. That just covered Genesis 2 and Genesis 3 and Genesis and just a few texture tips here in the new versions of Cinema. So anyway, this is Cinema 4D R17 I'm using here, and virtually exactly the same as R16 in terms of just general use as far as Arnold is concerned. In fact, the guy who does the Arnold stuff over at Solid Angle told me that he hasn't really included too many of the new features of R17 quite yet into Arnold. Some of the more exciting features that I'm looking forward to him incorporating are the material override, which would allow us to actually put a Arnold standard shader in here, and then for previs or for quick for previs, for just quick renders, you can put a standard shader in there and texture everything based on standard shader with all the Arnold lighting, and quickly get something out that you could look at in Premiere Pro or After Effects or something like that. In a recent project I worked on with a guy I'm collaborating out with in Britain, we used that technique as a method to be able to quickly get a good look at our characters and allow him to be able to edit while I continue to work on the actual animations and stuff. So we basically did all our camera shots rendered out in a flat shaded kind of sort of view, and he could actually edit the shots while I continued to actually polish the animation. That was a really, really good technique. It would have been a lot faster if we had been using R17 and that material override had been available to us. As it stood, we just basically had to add a standard shader to every single object in the scene and then render out that way. Alright, some other new things. I'm going to do a tutorial breaking all the new features of 1.0.6.0 of Arnold down, but just a quick few really awesome things. We actually have shading in the viewport now, so you can actually see your shading directly here in the viewport without actually even using the IPR at all. So you can completely reclaim your whole entire viewport back, which is really great. In this particular case I am running into a little bit of an issue here, but I think that's mostly because I undocked it while it was actually rendering. Go ahead and do this again. Yep, and so getting some really, really nice feedback here in the viewport as far as renders are concerned. We also have the ability to do render regions in the viewport as well. And what's really nice is if you guys are isotropics fans, you're used to being able to actually rotate in your actual viewport window and use it as kind of sort of your real viewport. Well, in Arnold you can do that as well here. So actually I'm left clicking on the actual IPR window and not on the viewport window, and I'm actually able to move around right here in the IPR. So pretty incredible. You can also pick objects here in the IPR as well and various different things. Alright, but yeah, more of a detailed one on all the specific changes here in 1.0.6.0 a little bit later. But today we're going to go over kind of sort of wrangling this material nightmare that we kind of have going on here. So in previous tutorials that I've shown you how to texture, we've used the classic brute force C4D technique of texturing this character up. Taking each individual polygon selection that was given to us by DAZ and basically adding a material for each single one of those. But utilizing Arnold, you may or may not have begun to realize that with the UDIM workflow, you actually can technically get rid of a lot of these materials, and you can really optimize this in a way that, you know, makes your life easier as a texture artist. So really, a vast majority of these materials are really not necessary. If we really break this down logically here, for the most part, all the bits of skin, with the exception of perhaps the fingernails, pretty much react to light in about the same kind of general sort of way. In general, you know, outside of course of the lips being thinner than the torso and all that kind of stuff, which we can all control with a separate map later, for the most part they're all skin, and they all pretty much are going to use a skin shader for the most part. The eyes are going to probably use a different shader, and so they probably require a different material. They're going to have different specular to them. They're going to have slightly different ways that they reflect. Same thing with the eyelashes. But for the most part, the majority of this character is pretty much skin. The majority of this actual mesh here. Our hair mesh is obviously separate, and so it has a separate material, and it's completely unrelated to the issue that we're having at hand really here. Same thing with the top and same thing with the skirt. But primarily concentrating on our main character, yes. The majority of hers is just pure skin, and it's going to have some sort of skin shader or some sort of standard shader with some sort of subsurface scattering to it. Alright, so what we can do is, generally what I do with most of my production characters that I'm generating directly from DAZ, I'll just delete all the materials and really start from scratch. We can also be selective and of course just get rid of everything except maybe, you know, just a particular eye material or something like that. And then of course you can use UDIM tricks that actually will allow us to only have like one or maybe even two materials here. I'm going to go ahead and go with the delete option, and we're going to go ahead and delete everything off of her, and what we'll do is we'll just grab one of the skin materials. And so let's just go ahead and grab the testa, lips, nostril, and face material basically. We'll drag it on and we'll just put it, you know, right after the pose more tag. No particular reason to put it there. Just as far as organization is concerned, I like to have my materials pretty much after all the main modifier tags of sorts. Arnold starting it, and then, you know, the weight tag, and then you get the pose morph, and then, you know, any collision tags will be here. Alright, and so what we need now is we need a selection that's going to pretty much define, actually we don't even really need a selection really. This material pretty much just be applied to the whole entire body, and any materials that pop up after this material will override it basically. So if we put a new eye material after this, and it's got a selection tag to it, it will overwrite what the skin shader was doing basically. Alright, so now we need to think about, well, how are we going to basically get all these materials into one spot or into one material automatically and have them all inherit the same properties without, you know, things getting kind of weird. And that's where UDIMs come into play. So if we switch to the production UV layout, for you guys that don't have my layouts, these are completely free and they're on my website, of course. Then the next few hours or so, I'll actually be uploading my R17 presets, which include all the new features in R17, including the new pen tool stuff, and some of the other new interface options that are included in R17. For instance, my new layouts include the take system as a part of the layout in certain areas. All right, but yeah, so right now we've got all of our UDIM, all of our polygon selections basically laid out in one UDIM tile right here. And so everything's just going to be laid right on top of each other, and it's going to look really ugly. The limbs are going to be laid on top of the face area. The torso is going to be laid on top of the limbs area. And the face is going to be laid on top of everything, and everything's just going to be jumbled up, and she's just not going to look very good. And in fact, if we go ahead and render her right now, we'll see that we just basically have a mess if she renders at all. Yeah, so right now we have a mess. The face material is basically being laid out on the arms. We don't have any eye material or anything like that, and everything's just laid out totally wrong right now. All right, so what we want to do first is we want to go ahead and separate out our UDIMs into a more cohesive unit here. So easiest way to do this is just to go ahead and just double click through your selections one by one and just basically separate everything out. So what we can do here is on the x-axis here, this normally defaults to 0. Go ahead and have it move one UDIM unit over to the left. And I'm basically going to put my limbs on UDIM tile 3. So this is going to be 1003 when we begin naming our textures. All right. The eyelash selection, this one's going to be interesting. I'm going to go ahead and move it way out of the way to start with. We're going to come back to that. The eyes, we can go ahead and put those on maybe UDIM 4 or 5. I think I'm going to put them on 4. This right here is the pupils, so that goes with the eyes. The iris goes with the eyes as well. The cornea also goes with the eyes. This is the tongue. That's going to go with the mouth. The teeth. The inner mouth goes with the mouth as well. And so basically what we're doing is we're creating a UDIM layout here where none of the polygons are overlapping each other. And they're all laid out on their own tiles. So an easy way to see this is if you load up your DAZ character, or if you created your own character, you've pretty much already done this. Hopefully set up multiple tiles, or set up your character at least in a tiled kind of sort of way where the tile is perfectly not overlapping anything. But if you're using DAZ, by default it's not going to really come in like this. But if you look at your DAZ textures under, and we'll go under Tested 2's original textures where textures haven't been turned into TX yet, we can see our eyes here, for instance. Open up the Windows 10 photo viewer here. You can see that we've got the iris, we've got the pupil, iris, and we've got the lacrimals here as well. And so this photo is set up exactly the same way that this is set up here in our actual UV editor here in Cinema 4D. So just by looking at your textures, you can kind of sort of see how these are actually going to be laid out. I've been dealing with these for so long that I already kind of sort of by default know what needs to go where, but that's kind of how I initially figured out. So these are the nipples, and they're just going to go right into the torso there. The skin neck selection is a part of the torso as well. The limbs, these are the forearm selections, so that goes as a part of the limbs. you know, I'm just quickly going through and just moving these one by one into place. And as you can start to see, our UDIM tile 1 is slowly clearing up. Our face, interestingly enough, is going to be, it's going to stay on UDIM tile 1, so we're not going to have to move that at all. The tears, we can put those with the eyelashes. We're kind of lucky in this particular case with this particular character. The way we exported it, they actually aren't overlapping with the eyes. In some characters that you export out of DAZ, they do overlap, so you may have to put them on their own UDIM. In this particular case, we can keep them with everything else. So this is the nostrils. It's part of the face. It doesn't need to move. Same thing with the lips. Doesn't need to move. And this is the, I think the lacrimals. So that's a part of the eyes. And then the face itself doesn't need to move. And then we're just left with the toenails and the fingernails, which go as a part of the limbs. And so there you go. Now your DAZ character is laid out in a UDIM fashion. So 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, and 1006. All right, so 6 UDIMs. So coming back over here into our textures, what we need to now do is we need to rename our textures so that they can take advantage of the UDIM workflow. And in that way, this material here will automatically load up all of the textures required for the skin in one shot. And so if you were just using a standard shader and you weren't doing any sort of SSS, this would pretty much be all you would need to do, and you pretty much could take your whole entire character and compartmentalize it into just one single material. However, most characters, a lot of their materials have different properties to them, and so you're either going to have to create different maps to change those properties, or create multiple different materials that have different properties to them. We'll go for the latter option, as creating textures that have specific properties is a very unique proposition. But anyway, starting with the face, if we come over to our texture window again, and I keep closing it, let's reopen that and kind of sort of leave that open, and then let's open up this. So now we have a visual representation of what our UDIMs need to be, and so we just need to rename our textures to match. So we know the eyes, for instance, since I'm already on them, we know those are 1004. So let's pick a name that we want to use for our color channel, for instance. So I like diffuse or diff. I like to do a 4-letter naming convention for my channels, and my color channel is the diffuse channel, so that's diff. And then we just need to simply add our UDIM number onto the end of that, so that's going to be 1004. This is the eyes, and this is the eye bump, so we're going to want to change that to bump, and that's going to be 1004 for the eyes there. So now we have a bump channel and a diffuse channel for our eyes. The face, same thing. And this is going to be 1001 because it uses the first UDIM. The face diffuse is going to be 1001. And the face specular is going to also be 1001. And so basically what's happening here is we're starting to convert our naming conventions so that Arnold can quickly just load up all these textures in one fell swoop. All right, so coming over here to our material network, and we'll come back to that texture renaming in just a few moments. but I'm gonna go ahead and minimize this, and let's go ahead and load up this material. So what we want to do here is we want to change our naming conventions so that instead of just, you know, using just the face, now we'll actually use our actual UDIMs for our diffuse channel. And so basically now what's going to end up happening, and it's not 1001, it's actually UDIM. So basically what's going to happen now is it's going to load up the diffuse for each of the UDIMs that we actually created in our texture. So it's going to go into our character, and basically if we defined 6 separate tiles, it's going to go and it's going to try to find a texture for each one of those tiles, and if it can't find a texture for any one of these, it's going to give us an error. So we need to make sure that we have enough UDIMs to exactly, or we need to make sure we have enough textures to exactly cover all 6 of these areas, depending upon what, of course, we're trying to actually cover. So right now we've got the diffuse, right? And then for the specular, you know, we've got that as well. So we need 6 textures for the specular now as well. And then we also had a bump channel as well. So we're going to want to make sure we have 6 bump textures. So, and then another thing we'll probably also want to do is in our texture manager, we'll probably want to go ahead and change these back to, well, we'll probably want to change them back to JPEG, but we would have to, of course, move those into the correct spot as well from the original textures. So a better bet would be to just go ahead and convert these into TX, and then this will automatically go from being red to being white again. Anyway, back in here, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and rename these. I think you guys kind of have the idea of how we're going to have to rename these, but back at the break, I will show you how I went ahead and renamed everything. Alrighty guys, so we're back and all the renaming is done. And so you can see here with the bump starting, you know, up at the top, it's 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, and 1005. And that relates to 1001 here for the face, 2 for the torso, 3 for the limbs, 4 for the eyes, and 5 for the mouth. Now, what about the eyelashes? That's 6. So we already know from what I was discussing before, Arnold's going to give us an error if we don't have a 6th UDIM here, and we've specified a 6th UDIM. So what can we do about that? Well, the eyelashes are a little tricky because they're kind of sort of doing their own thing. They don't really require any subsurface scattering, and they're really a simpler material, you know. So in this particular case, what we can do is we can come over to Testa and we can go ahead and bring back our eyelash material. So we can go ahead and add the eyelash material in and go ahead and drag it over here. So it's basically overtaking the skin material here. So now it's in a slot to the right of the skin material, and it's gonna overwrite the skin material on this particular area of the body here, which is the eyelashes. We also need to go ahead and add the eyelash selection tag back into play here. So that's this second one here. So with the eyelash material selected, we can go ahead and click and drag the eyelash selection in there, and so the eyelashes will only affect this part of the mesh. Excellent. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to make it so that Arnold won't think, and we'll go ahead and save real quick, of course. We need to make it so that Arnold won't think that there's actually 6 UDIMs, but it'll only think there's 5. Now, the eyelash selection material doesn't use UDIMs at all, so it's just going to go ahead and look at the first UDIM for its material. So all we need to do is come back into our texture editor, and we need to just simply move the eyelashes and the tears over to UDIM tile 1. So what's going to end up happening is we're basically, for the skin material here, we are going to allow the face to basically be in the exact same place that the eyelashes are. And so if we were just using the skin material by itself, we would get this nasty artifacting where part of the lips is a part of the eyelash, and part of the eye is a part of the tears and whatnot. But because this material is being overridden by the eyelash, we get a perfectly valid look. So let's go ahead and grab our eyelashes, and we're going to go ahead and do a -1 move, and we're just going to go ahead and click apply a couple of times until we get this back to UDIM tile 1. And then coming over here, one of these is going to be our tears right there, and we're going to go ahead and move that back until it's also in UDIM tile 1 by itself. And there we go. So now we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 UDIMs. And so Arnold won't complain, and everything will be glorious. All right. So any other problems we might have? So our bump is good. We've got 5, and diffuse 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's all related once again to the way our UVs are set up. But once we come down here to our specular, we start to notice we have a little bit of issue here. We've only got 3 tiles. So DAZ by default out of the box didn't give us some specular to define the specular for our eyes. And vice versa, it also didn't give us any specular for our teeth and mouth either. Now, if you've watched any of my DAZ tutorials, you know that you can go back into DAZ and you can find out whether or not there's a material for these, and you can certainly pull that material in. And that's probably going to be the best fix. A temporary quick fix for us for this tutorial real fast would be to just go ahead and actually open up this specular in Photoshop. So we can do an open with, and we can choose another app, and we can go ahead and look for Photoshop here. And I don't want to always use that to open. I just want to open it up just this one time. And this is Photoshop 2015. I'm going to go ahead and open up here. And so all we have to do is just fill this with black. And then save as. And we'll save this as Spec 104. And there we go. So as a temporary solution, we now have a specular that's completely black that's defining the specular for our eyes, which is not physically accurate or realistic, but it'll keep Arnold from complaining. And then I just did a control drag and just dropped, and that created a copy of that material. And then we can go ahead and name this 1005, and that'll take care of our 2 missing textures. Alrighty, and so if we go ahead and look at our IPR now, we should be good. But the other thing that we need to do, of course, is we also need to convert these into TXs again. So easy way to do this is to come into our texture manager. We'll switch to use textures in folder, and then we'll simply point it at this tested 2 folder and To do that, all I did was came into Windows Explorer here, clicked in this little white space at the end here, so it'll just select everything for me. And I just did a Control C, and that just allowed me to quickly grab that folder and go ahead and pop it in here. And then if I hit Create Now, it's going to go ahead and create a TX for all of the textures in that folder. And we didn't necessarily need to do all of them. You could have easily had created a new folder and just moved just the ones that you wanted to convert. Since not all of our textures are actually bad, but it's okay. And so now that that conversion process is done, all I'm going to do is just do a search for TXs here in the original textures folder. Grab all the TXs, and I created a new folder under Testa 2 and original textures, and I'm just going to go ahead and move all the TXs right into that new folder. And so now I've got all the TXs in here, and all I need to do now is just get rid of the textures that I just don't want to copy over. So, you know, some of these ones that are related to, that are like utility textures, the ones related to the skirt and stuff that we don't care about, the hair, bump and diffuse, UDIM textures we don't really care about, the opacity and specular for the hair, we don't care about that either. And so yeah, we'll just delete all of that. And that just leaves us with just the stuff related to her skin, her hair, and her mouth. Take all of these, shift select them, or do a Control A, and we'll go ahead and move them over to her main textures folder. So just drag and drop, and then we'll just do an overwrite. We'll skip the soul. We don't want to copy the soul over. That's one of the older textures. And so there we go. And then we can delete the new folder. It was just a utility folder we were using temporarily to get the TXs separated from the JPEGs. And so we are done. And so now if we render, we shouldn't get an error. And she should look exactly the same as she looked before. Except now she's taking advantage of just one single texture. Amazing. Okay, and so she's optimized. And so now what we can do is we can start to take advantage of subsurface scattering at this point. So first things first, we probably should go ahead and rename this. So instead of test the lips and nostril, this actually become test the skin now. And then all the other materials that we created previously to define her, we pretty much can get rid of all of them now. So we don't really need the sclera anymore, or the pupil, or might keep the lacrimals just to be on the safe side. We don't need the teeth or the tongue or a separate face material anymore. Nails or limbs. We do need a cornea material. Cornea is a particularly special area that requires its own little special kind of sort of custom thing. So I'm going to go ahead and add the cornea back to her. And I accidentally applied it to her whole entire body. We just want to apply it. Oh, never mind. It is going to get applied to her whole body. That's actually a really cool look, actually. But yeah, we just want to move it, you know, to the right of the eyelashes. And basically what we want to do is select just the cornea selection, which is this one here. And we just want to drag that in so that only the cornea is affected by this material. And so there we go. We get this nice clean cornea again. So you can selectively overwrite, as you can see, any material that you want to overwrite, you know, if you need a particular look and you need a particular shader network for that material. Awesome. So with her new skin material now, let's delete the torso material as well. So now our material editor is a lot cleaner. So coming in here into our shader network, what we can do with the standard shader now is we can actually go ahead and enable subsurface scattering. So we've already actually got a subsurface scattering weight going here already for Testa. It looks like we've already enabled it before, and I guess I've already explained it to you actually. So the weight controls how strong the subsurface scattering effect is. You know, so for her skin, I think something around 0.7, 0.6 is probably pretty good for this for the standard shader anyway. And then your radiuses are RGB, and so for human skin, you know, the red wavelength typically comes out a little bit more, so you see a lot more red from the subsurface scattering, less blue and green. So with this, we're basically allowing the ray for the red to go in much deeper into her face, much deeper into her body, and thus we're getting more red coming out on the other end. And so it's going about 3 centimeters deep into the actual face and arm and stuff like that. So like I always say when I'm teaching most people, you know, use a ruler. If you have a ruler on your table, it's always good to have like a ruler lying around, or just having a physical object lying around that you know the measurements of, you know, and just like kind of sort of, you know, imagine, you know, if you were to stick a needle 3 centimeters deep into your skin, you know, what level of your body is that? Is that the blood layer, you know, or is that the fat layer, or is that just the top of your skin, the main epidermal layer? You know, so 3 centimeters deep, you know, you're starting to reach blood vessels and organs and stuff like that a little bit. So, you know, that's where all the red stuff is. So that's kind of how far deep you want to kind of go. Let me see, 1 centimeter. Let me look at my ruler here. 1 centimeter. Actually, 1 centimeter is pretty deep. You know, so 1 or 1.5 for the red probably, and then 0.5 or so for the green and the blue. And that's probably going to give you some pretty good results as far as your subsurface scattering is concerned. And so that pretty much is SSS for the skin as well. And that pretty much wraps up this tutorial. So that's just really quickly optimizing the your network there. Alrighty. There is one more thing. So the subsurface scattering right now, we've got a weight and we've got a radius, but subsurface scattering also has a color related to it as well. And so right now you're actually using we're obviously using our diffuse to define our subsurface scattering, but we could actually use a separate subsurface scattering color as well. So of course here this material, this separate material that was defined for the face, which had SSS on it, you know, I've renamed to SSSC, so this is the SSS color channel. So we certainly could bring this material in and define it as the color channel for our subsurface scattering. And then, of course, the problem with this material is going to be that if we make it a UDIM material, we're going to be faced with the issue that we're going to start to get an error in Arnold here. And that's because we don't have a 1002, 1003, 1004, and 1005 to define the other areas that need UDIM, need that color as well. So obviously an easy way to fix that would be to go ahead and duplicate these 4 materials and use their color as the SSS color. You know, since we don't have an actual real subsurface scattering color for them, you could always, of course, go into Mari and paint an actual subsurface scattering color for these different areas. You know, you can get really detailed with having a specific way the subsurface scattering kind of sort of happens on the eyes, or the way it happens on the mouth and different things like that. And then the other thing is areas that you don't want to have subsurface scattering. So there's areas where you just want you want the subsurface scattering to basically do nothing. And so you could create a whole nother material called SSSW for the weight of the subsurface scattering. And you could technically apply that to the weight and control how much weight the subsurface scattering has. Or the way I like to do it is with the subsurface scattering color, if you put black as the color in the subsurface scattering color, then those areas will have no subsurface scattering at all. And so that would be a great way to dial down the eye's subsurface scattering, or it'd be a great way to dial down the face a little bit, but give the lips more subsurface scattering. So the lips will have more of a white color and the face will have a less of a color, or there'll be more of a really, really saturated red and the face will be a little bit less saturated. Alrighty, so back at the break, I will show you some of the new textures I've created for this stuff, and then we'll implement those. Alrighty, and so we're back, guys, and so all I've done is I've just duplicated the diffuse textures for the different color channels, and I've renamed them SSC. Like so. I've made a copy of the mouth material, and the reason why I've done that is because we don't really want the teeth to have any subsurface scattering at all, and so we need to make the teeth black. Easiest way to do that is to come here in C4D, create a new standard C4D material, go ahead and drag that copy material from your Windows Explorer over here into the texture slot. And no, you don't want to create a copy at the project location. You just simply want to use this as kind of a dummy. And then you can go ahead and switch over to Body Paint UV Edit or Body Paint 3D Paint. And then here on your mesh, you're going to go ahead and select the teeth. Just double click that to make sure that they're selected. You want to add the material to Testa. So you can just drag the material and then go over to the objects panel, and then while still holding your mouse, drag and just drop it right on her. Alright. Over here in the materials, you're going to go ahead and edit it. Excellent. And that makes it editable. And then finally, with those polygons selected, all you need to do is go into texture UV edit polygons mode, basically, and that's going to put you in a mode where you can select the UV polygons here. Now if we come over to our layers and we go ahead and select our material again, what we can do is we create a new layer, and we can go ahead and fill the selected polygons with the current color. And so this is going to fill them up with a solid white color in this particular case. We could easily fill them up with black too. You just want to pick either a solid white or a solid black, one of the two. Actually, the teeth are going to need to be black in order for this to work. So let's go ahead and just, save ourselves the trouble and go ahead and fill those with black. All right, cool. And then we can go ahead and save the file. And yes, we want to save changes to the textures. And cool. And so now this texture here is now filled completely with black only where the teeth are. Impressive. So coming in here into Photoshop, what we can do is we can go ahead and actually, well, the thing is we actually want to have layers here. So we need to save this texture as a slightly different format. So easiest way to do that would be to come into Photoshop here and let's go ahead and save as a TIFF. That's going to give us the ability to have some layers. And LZW compression is always great. It's going to make your TIFF smaller, which is awesome if you have a lot of AK textures. Coming over to our materials, let's go ahead and in the Attributes Manager, let's go ahead and drag in the TIFF now as the texture we want to use. And no, we don't want to copy it to our project. And then finally, what we want to do is come in here and just go ahead and create a new layer and fill the layer with black in the currently selected polygons. And let's go ahead and hit save again. And that will overwrite the texture. Now in Photoshop, we can go ahead and drag in our TIFF, and we should have a layer specifically dedicated to the teeth, which is filled with complete black. Which means all we need to do now is create another layer and hit X to switch our colors. X will switch your default foreground and background colors. I almost always am using black and white. And then we'll just fill the rest of this with white. And so there you go. So now you have a situation where the teeth are black and the rest of the area is white. And that's actually great. One little issue though, of course, is we do want the rest of the mouth to have proper subsurface scattering. So actually what we can do is bring in the original mouth JPEG and hit enter. And so only the teeth will have no subsurface scattering, but the tongue and the rest of the area of the mouth will have this nice red subsurface scattering going on. So this is the proper picture here. We just wanted to punch out the teeth basically. And then yeah, we'll hit save on that. And so this will become our subsurface scattering color for 1005, and we can delete the original JPEG that we had for that. Excellent. And just rename this. And so all we need to do now is, these are the only materials we care about changing the names for, or in fact we only really care about these four because we've already done TX for this. Let's create a new folder. And we don't really need to give it a name, it's just a utility folder once again. And we'll go ahead and drag all of our subsurface scattering color materials in there. Copy the address out here to the location on our hard drive. Come over here to C4D. We're going to switch over to our production layout. Delete this material. We don't need it anymore. We were just using it as a temporary material to go ahead and use some body paint functionality. Body paint does not work on Arnold materials very well, so for obvious reasons. And then all we want to do now is go into our texture manager and use textures in folder, and we're going to pick the folder that we copied over and do a create. And it's going to go ahead and create 4 textures for us. And so that process is done. Come back over here, grab our TXs, And we can go ahead and drag those into Testa's main texture folder. The JPEGs we can drag back into the original textures Testa 2 folder, and the new folder we can delete. And so there we go. And so if we come back to C4D now, dock our IPR over here and render, everything should be peachy. Okay, our render failed. Let's see why. It's because those are named JPEG. So all we need to do is come into our Testa materials here, come into our skin material, open the network editor, and we just need to optimize this, edit it a little bit. So really it's just a matter of making this TX. And there we go. Now obviously, of course, the face itself is so somehow that DAS exported out an SSS that was like this weird pink for the face, but we don't have that same weird pink for the other two materials. So it's gonna look a little bit weird having her face having that pink and then having the rest of the body have more of this orangey SSS. So obviously that's something that I would fix. Just go ahead and duplicate this material, call it SSSC, and then go ahead and just do a TX for that, and that would be fixed. But other than that, that is the last thing. Once again, you can pretty much create UDIM textures for pretty much any property here in Arnold. So, you know, if you wanted to have a material for the weight, which normally would be called your gloss channel in a PBR texture kind of workflow, if you guys are used to working with game textures or used to working with a substance painter, normally your gloss would go into this channel here. So you create a gloss, create a roughness, and control roughness with the texture. You can control the reflectance at normal with the texture as well. Under refraction, you control the refraction weight, the IOR, everything can be controlled with the texture. So using UDIMs, using textures, you can pretty much literally have one material, and the eyelashes themselves would be defined by maybe an opacity UDIM. And you know, most of the materials that don't have opacity, they would just be pure black. And the ones that do have opacity, you get that white and black, and so forth and so on. So this is a very powerful technique that you can use if you're really just trying to have only one texture on your character. But it's sometimes it's very helpful to go ahead and break up the textures into at least maybe 3 or 4 different texture tags. But it's kind of nightmarish and kind of crazy to have like 28 textures on a character. It just doesn't really make any sense, especially when using, you know, such a powerful nodal based system like Arnold. So anyway, that's it for this tutorial. In the next one, I'm going to actually cover the skin shader and how we can get a much more realistic skin out of our characters. So I will see you guys then.